All right, next up on the program, JB Straubel is here. He is the founder and CEO of Redwood Materials, but you probably know him as one of the co-founders of a little electric car startup from here in the Silicon Valley called Tesla. And welcome to the program, JB.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we've known each other forever. I'm 50 feet away from my Tesla Roadster number 16 and my signature Model S 00001. What an amazing journey you had at Tesla. Tell me just if you were to recap the experience from Roadster, Model S to Model 3, and all the near-death experiences for the company. How do you look back on that amazing journey in your life?
Oh man, it's like trying to recap, the Encyclopedia Britannica here. It's such an adventure. I just kind of look back on it all, mild disbelief and some of the brutal, near death, most difficult stuff kind of gets, a little bit tempered even with just a little bit of time. And, I just feel incredibly proud to have been a part of this, crazy revolution and been at the right time in history when all this was possible and we were able to do these things.
And the batteries seem to be the key component here. There was something about that time period when y'all started working on Tesla and making it work where, correct me if I'm wrong, but battery technology from the smartphone revolution and the laptop boom of the late 90s into the 2000s played some sort of role in setting the groundwork for Tesla to be able to do what you did, correct?
Yeah, it was pivotal. And I think that was, if there's a luck to it, that was the lucky timing and some of it was intentional. But lithium ion batteries, were commercialized in about the year 2000 for laptops. Sony did that. It was bleeding edge, then, and, 3 years later, Tesla starts and, 4 or 5 years later, we're building them into the first Roadster next to you. So, that was, it was that sort of beginning of that decade that, presented that kind of opportunity. And before that, you just couldn't make a modern electric car. They weren't technically feasible. You could only do so much with, nickel metal hydride or lead acid batteries. I remember one stat that, we would constantly kind of talk about or think about, and it's that, the Roadster, when it was fully charged, the whole car, with a person sitting in it, has an energy density higher than a lead acid battery. So, there's no physical way you could take this old technology and make it, perform that way. So that was what made it possible.
And the cost of the original battery pack in that Roadster was somewhere in the $40,000 range, $50,000 range, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was in that ballpark. It was, close to $1,000 a kilowatt hour.
Wow.
So I think 53 and change kilowatt hours in the first generation Roadster, and probably around $50,000 to $55,000, something in there.
Just for the battery pack.
Just for the battery.
I replaced my Roadster battery pack with the 300 plus mile one, I think, for $25,000. X number of years later, and now I can go 350 miles. Although you probably wouldn't want to drive for 6 hours in a Roadster. I think it might be a better mission for the Y.
Need a chiropractor after that.
You did feel the road in the Roadster, but it was mind blowing. Tell me what it was like to deliver those first 100. If you take yourself back to that time period, and people on the road in LA and in the Bay Area. And those first 100 getting delivered, and I guess Larry, Sergey, and yourself, Bill Lee, David Sachs, myself. There was just like a group of people who put those $160,000 deposits down for those first 100 signatures. What was it like when you delivered those first 100 signatures?
I mean, it was incredibly rewarding and exciting. We were obviously pretty late delivering them in the first place.
Just a year or two.
just a little bit. And all these early customers just were such a key part of the company and the mission back then. It was kind of, this sense of camaraderie, making this happen. And And yeah, we were super proud of it. We'd put our heart and soul into that thing and worked on it for so many years as a pretty small team. And obviously it was a very different, profile then, much lower profile. But, to see a modern electric car out there and having customers actually enjoying it and experiencing it, doing, multi-100-mile drives, it was pretty amazing. I mean, that was revolutionary. People didn't, most people would still think we were lying actually about the range, in those days, which was amazing.
That is such an accurate description of that time period, is the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that was being directed at you and Tesla was insane. And, we're driving the cars 150, 200 miles and telling people, look, it works. And they're literally saying nobody will ever buy an electric car because of range anxiety. And I'm like, I'm charging the thing once a week in LA. It's my daily driver. I drive, 10 miles back and forth to Santa Monica to the office. And I literally had people jump in the car when I would be at valets and just say, please take me for a ride around the corner. Please, I want to experience the exhilaration, even at that time before ludicrous mode. I don't know what the 0 to 60 was on the Roadster, but it was 4 seconds or 3.7 or something.
Yeah, I think, just under 4 for the sport model, but it was the same experience though. I mean, minus all the creature comforts and the NVH and the handling and a bunch of other things.
Power steering.
A few little things. But that same experience of getting in there, feeling the torque, feeling a 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds. I was driving the Roadster last weekend, and it's amazing how you could just feel the DNA of what electric cars became and are today. Even in that early thing.
If you don't have business insurance, you failed one of the first steps in being a great entrepreneur. Startups should look no further than Embroker, Embroker. Embroker's technology saves you time and money. Prices are up to 20% lower, and you're going to get better coverage than incumbents, and you go from sign up to quote and purchase in just 10 minutes. When you work with Embroker instead of business insurance incumbents, you're not dealing with these large, slow corporations, and the sign up takes just days, not weeks. The process is completely transparent. There is no opaque pricing. And I'm going to quickly explain 2 crucial types of insurance you need. Cyber insurance. What does it cover? It covers hacks. They happen all the time. And you need to have coverage for that. Plus, D&O insurance. This is for your directors, people on your board, and officers, the top 5 or 6 people of the company. If somebody does something dumb and you get sued, you need to protect the directors and officers because they're responsible. And even if you don't do something dumb and somebody still wants to sue you, because people can sue you for any reason. They could be wrong, you could be right. It doesn't matter. You need to have the insurance online so you can protect yourself. So, to instantly buy custom-built insurance for startups, go to embroker.com/twist. embroker.com/twist. And while you're there, get an extra 10% off by using the offer code TWIST. Okay, let's get back to this amazing program. Then the Model S comes out, and let's face it, that was just a game changer in terms of luxury and who could be a potential customer.
Yep.
Let's fast forward to the delivery of the Signature 1000.
Yep.
What was that like, and how was that different than because I think at that point, Tesla was a public company. I remember this because I had people coming to my house to try to take pictures of the, Signature 001. Now, y'all had, I think, 40 Founder series that you had produced, and Steve Jurvetson has number 1 of that, obviously, and I'm sure you have one of them. So they were driving around, but what was that milestone like when the Signature 1000 come out and it's a proper sedan that, families and valets could actually park.
Yeah.
As opposed to the Roadster, which valets would be, I can't start your car.
Couldn't get in it in the first place. Yeah.
They couldn't get in it, but that, so many times I had to sit there with the valet and tell them the car's on. And they're like, the car's not on. I don't hear it. And they would sit there and they'd be like, it's on. It doesn't make noise.
Well, the Model S was, it's such a different car. That was the one that really, with the Roadster, it was a technology validation. We proved the batteries could work. They could go in a car. It could be safe. It could do the range and acceleration. But I mean, the S was a whole different thing. And, it was so good. We put so much effort into that. And I mean, Elon was hell bent on making it, the best car, on the road. And we, I think really delivered on that at the time. It was phenomenal. I still am amazed though at how much skepticism there was, even after, delivering those, I imagined that, people would see this and they'd say, oh, okay, clearly this is the future. This is all going to work. All the car companies are going to copy this immediately.
Yeah.
And, we'll have to go really fast, figure out how we can carve out a niche. And it just didn't happen.
So strange.
Customers loved it. It was a runaway hit with reviewers and magazines and customers, but the copying and the market change didn't happen. That was interesting.
That was fascinating to me as well, because now instead of taking one person for a ride, I've got 5 people jumping in the car. People are using it as their daily drivers. And now you're starting in Los Angeles and in the Bay Area to see them flood into people's parking lots at Google, Facebook. You couldn't go anywhere in Silicon Valley without, 10, 20, 30 of them being in the parking lots at Apple, et cetera. And yet no competitors arrive. And you're blowing past 200 miles and people are still claiming that there is a range issue. And the superchargers start hitting, 200-300 miles added in 40 minutes or whatever it was. And that was always what I found so strange about the criticism. The car has won not only car of the year. There were people who said this is the greatest car ever made. I think Car and Driver, correct me if I'm wrong, was one of them, said the greatest car ever made.
I think they did. I mean, they were just blown away. It's like didn't compute. It didn't even fit into their rating system in terms of efficiency and performance and luxury. It didn't work in the way they'd reviewed cars previously.
Now the Model 3, that was a hard one. That almost killed the company. You guys just worked yourself to the bone to get that out. Let's fast forward to that, and then we'll switch over to your new company. Tell us about making the $50,000, $60,000 car that ultimately, I would say, and I think you probably would agree, you tell me if you do, was the completion of the mission. The mission was always to have a car that was really accessible. Some people might argue the $30,000 car is the ultimate slam dunk, but I consider the Model 3 and Y just so transcendently good as cars and so accessible to such a wide group of people that y'all succeeded in the mission of creating a long-term sustainable electric car company and electric future. Tell us about how horrible that was up until the deployment of it, and then how rewarding it was to not have the company go out of business again and deliver again.
It was pretty brutal. It's just such an unbelievable exercise in learning how hard it is to make large quantities of things, and deep respect for manufacturing and scale. I think there aren't that many startup companies that sort of have to tackle that level of automation, production, supply chain, all those other complexities, and it kind of brought us to our knees, for a good year or two in the midst of that whole thing. It was all hands on deck. The whole company was pulled into this. Every level of engineering and every other function for that matter. I pretty much moved to Nevada in those days and camped out at the Gigafactory and did everything I possibly could do to make batteries possible and battery packs and motors and everything else. It was pretty crazy. Hard to expect, and looking back into it, we knew it'd be hard, but we didn't know how hard.
Yeah, it's one of the great things I think about entrepreneurship is that if you actually knew how hard it was going to be, you just would not do it. It's one of the great ironies or paradoxes.
So true.
You guys I remember visiting the factory and the Gigafactory at that time period, and you literally had executives from the corporate office on the line delivering cars, literally people who were in accounting were there delivering Model 3s to customers just to keep the company solvent. The esprit de corps is was just palatable. And, I just think the world, you probably don't hear this enough, but I think the world does thank you ultimately for the massive sacrifice it took to make the world pivot to electric. And it's so clear, I think, and I'm curious your thoughts, that now that Tesla has done this and succeeded, it is now inevitable that the ICE engine will be retired and we will be 100% electric in the next decade, 2 or 3. What are your thoughts on that?
I 100% agree. I mean, we've passed the threshold here, the tipping point, or whatever analogy you want to use. There's no going back, and there'll still be bumps along the way. I mean, it's sobering to realize or remember, what a small percent of the fleet is still electrified. I mean, we're still, broadly in single digit percents, maybe approaching 10, depending on which region. But, we've got a long way to go still, but, it's clear now to every major, auto company, maybe bar a few holdouts, but, people realize this is the future and where it's headed. And it's really cool, because that was actually one of the main missions of the team at Tesla in the earliest days was, even despite how hard it was and, maybe we'd fail trying, but, damn the torpedoes, we were going to try and, convince the world that this was the future and accelerate it as much as we could. And, having that shared mission and that sense of purpose, made it possible, I'd say, to get through the production hell and, keep everyone engaged and aligned and create that, that spirit that you felt.
Norway, 75% of new passenger car sales in 2020 are electric.
It's amazing.
I mean, they heavily subsidize it, they're incenting, but it just shows what this combination of excellence from Tesla and the product combined with a country that takes it seriously. And by the way, Norway has the biggest oil reserves and largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. People don't know that, but their offshore oil is unbelievable. And it's quite paradoxical that Norway is 75% new car EV and they have the largest reserves of oil. Let's just say something about, what they're doing domestically versus what's there. If Tesla, and we'll go over to Redwood Materials next, if Tesla had failed, what would the state of EVs be today in terms of, let's say you failed at the Model S, time period. Just Model S never got delivered. Model S doesn't get delivered. Where are we at in the world with EV production?
Well, I mean, personally, I think the technology is so compelling that it was going to happen at some point, no matter what. Mm-hmm. I don't think it would have happened as fast. And I think, we may still be, bumbling along if Tesla had failed, as you said, somewhere in one of those production ramps, S or even 3. I just think it would have taken much longer and the world wouldn't be as far along as we are now. And we'd have higher carbon. When would Ford
do the electric truck? Do you think they would be doing it now or they would do it 10, 20 years from now?
Hard to predict. I'm pretty sure it would have been later. And
I'm going to put it at closer to 2 decades than 1.
And that really matters. This stuff, I mean, we can't go fast enough in terms of decarbonizing the world. It's terrifying, to realize, how screwed up we are and how far we still have to go. So, that acceleration and that, pulling ahead of, other companies launching this is really, really important to the world.
If extreme weather, no matter how you look at it, the extreme weather we're seeing is, it's getting worse. I think 7 of the 8 fires we had in the last year are the record fires in California history. So this is in a very acute situation, even with the massive progress we're making. But founders plus technology can change the world, and you did. So we're thankful for that. Tell us about Redwood Materials, which you started in 2019.
Yeah, Redwood Materials. So, I started this, to kind of look ahead at, some of the issues and infrastructure and materials, supply chain problems that were coming at us, as the whole fleet electrifies. So, first off, I love being an entrepreneur. I love building things. I love, building teams and companies and projects. And, I really believe strongly in the ability of, small teams to have big, leveraged impacts on the future. And, we just talked about that at Tesla, of course. But, what I saw that wasn't getting addressed, I thought fast enough was, first off, looking at the end of life for EV batteries. It seems like a small issue and it seems far in the future and not something to worry about, but it is a substantial scale problem. And it's going to take us quite a few years to get ready at scale, to fully demanufacture all of these batteries. And I think it's the challenge of reaching scale and economies of scale around that a lot of people forget. And the other thing for me is sort of imagining where this all ends up. And, pretty bullish that the whole fleet is going to electrify. All the cars on the planet will be electric. And, once you do that, all of those materials that make up those cars are going to be in a closed loop ecosystem. They don't go away. They're in the car for the life of the car. And, that combined industry is bigger than all of the mining that feeds it. It's bigger than the existing kind of, parts industries that supply it. And it doesn't exist today. So to me, it's sort of seeing this massive industry that is going to be created. It's a certainty. And also seeing nothing happening yet and it not existing. That to me was part of the really compelling reason to jump into Redwood.
What happens if a Tesla gets totaled, the battery pack maybe, has whatever 10% degradation and it's, 5-year-old battery pack. What actually happens to the battery packs today? And then what is your plan for used battery packs in the future?
Yeah, there's luckily a small number of, battery packs from EVs today that are actually reaching end of life. They last pretty long. And it's like you said, a few that get totaled or wrecked. Generally those, get, taken apart. The modules come out of the pack. A lot of components can get salvaged and reused. Even in a damaged pack, some can get reused. The modules themselves, if they're really dead, truly end of life, can't be refurbished or reused, go into a recycling pathway. And, today we do recycle some EV modules, but the bulk of the stuff we recycle is actually smaller post-consumer, stuff and also production scrap. Those are the biggest feedstocks. But those batteries then go through this recycling pathway, and the process we're scaling and inventing today is how do we essentially take them apart chemically and reintroduce them right back into cell manufacturing as fast as we possibly can.
And how does that work? Are the materials in for a neophyte like myself, are the materials in my battery pack spent and then cannot be reused, or can they simply be taken apart and reconstituted? How does that actually work chemically and practically? In layman's terms, obviously.
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than recycling an aluminum can or something like that, because there's multiple materials, multiple metals all mixed together, and they're not just in a simple metallic state. When you look at an aluminum can, you can pretty easily imagine, okay, there's some aluminum here. I could crush it, I could melt it, I could make a new can. The same high level thing can happen with a battery. Those materials are fundamentally all of the atoms are still fundamentally there. They're not damaged. They haven't been lost to the environment. The function of the battery has been degraded. And maybe the best way to think about it is that it's almost kind of corroded internally. Some of the atoms have recombined, the elements have kind of reorganized themselves in a way that the function of the device is no longer there, but all of the elements are still inside. So, we basically, are able to essentially take it apart, separate out one at a time, using the different chemical properties of the metals, and separate them back into, pure streams of each of those components. And looking really thoughtfully at how is it made again, we can figure out the most efficient ways to go, to kind of jump and tunnel through from that recycling process into the manufacturing process.
Got it. How long does a Tesla modern battery pack last? 200,000 or 300,000 miles, it seems, and then it goes down to what, 70%, 80%?
Yeah, and I mean maybe even more than that. Depends on the use case. It could be 15 years pretty easily, maybe even 20 years for some of the longer lived batteries.
So we don't know yet because they've been in the field. Is that the actual truth of it? Is that it's hard to predict?
It is to some extent, but, there's sort of a probability distribution for how long these things last. They don't all die on sort of year 16 and a half. Or, there's this sort of bell curve that happens, and that bell curve is different based on every chemistry and every car and every product. The interesting thing is, this is all much more deterministic than trying to predict vehicle sales or something like that. That's really hard. You're projecting people's behavior and everything else and incentives. Here, the cars are already sold. We know how many there are. We know where they went. The only real variable is that curve. How wide is it? Where's the center of it? So this is actually phenomenally predictable. More predictable than if you were trying to look ahead and say how many would be sold and where would they be sold.
It's fascinating to me that now that the batteries, we have a 300, I think our Model Y is 320, and then we're thinking about getting the long range Model S. I was going to get the Plaid, but I was like, you know what? I think I want the long range more, so it's easier to go to LA and Tahoe and not even think about the battery. If those degrade, even 50% the batteries, you'd still be at 200 miles. Yep. So this concept, this big fear was that the battery packs would degrade. That actually hasn't come to pass, has it? Did you guys think that they would degrade faster than they did?
No, I think, I think there's probably too much focus on range degradation being the end of life. What you're saying is, I think, right on. That probably won't be the way that batteries reach end of life. A bunch of other things happen over time. They start to lose power capacity when they get really old. And eventually, they sort of have a knee in their performance where, something else goes wrong and it accelerates, or functionally just won't work. Some part fails.
Got it.
That's typically where I believe the end of life will be. If it was a nice linear degradation, I think people would be super happy driving them at 50% of their initial range. It'll be an old car in 15 years.
How long are these electric vehicles going to last when compared to ICE vehicles? Because without a transmission as such and, a giant oil, disgusting carbon burning engine in the front, it seems like even like brake pads last forever because you have regeneration. Like, what is the lifespan of an electric vehicle when compared to ICE? And it does seem to me that these things might be on the road a lot longer than traditional cars. Am I correct?
I think they absolutely will be. You're basically talking about an electric motor, which, has, can run continuously in many cases, for tens of years. It's not going to wear out. With a well-designed system, there's no reason it shouldn't last many hundreds of thousands of miles or, maybe 1 million miles.
We've had a couple of those, right? There's been a couple in Europe that have hit 1 million miles. Yep. Now, they've changed their battery packs. I think in the one I read about that hit 1 million or close to it, they had changed the battery pack 3 times, which I think, since the car is so old, it was probably one of the original Model S's. And apparently that person probably wanted to keep upgrading it. But, the warranties are 8 years and 120,000 miles. So that's pretty bold for Tesla to, I think that was increasing for Tesla, right? They kept increasing the warranty.
It's always a little bit of a crystal ball trying to figure that out, but I think it's proving out to be really low risk and conservative. But on the material recycling, the other piece to kind of remember that maybe isn't as obvious is production scrap and yield loss. And there's a surprising amount of material that actually starts into the production process that doesn't make it through to a finished car to a customer. And, that stuff happens immediately. It happens day 0, of a car's life. So, depends on exactly where you look, but that can pretty easily be 10% of the material.
Got it. So when we're making battery packs, there's some amount of overflow. Things are not getting included in the battery pack, and that just basically falls on the factory floor, so to speak, or maybe literally.
And some of this is structural. Imagine the equivalent of like a stamping where you're trying to, make a circle out of a nice rectangular sheet of paper. All the stuff that's around the circle is production scrap. It wasn't really wasted, but, it's still material that didn't get put into the original or the final product. So,
and that has equal value. It tastes just as good, right? It's the exact same material. This is what happens when a sushi chef cuts basically a loin of tuna. They've got all this scrap when they cut around it, and that scrap goes into your spicy tuna roll.
That's
essentially.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And that's a really, significant amount of material. When we're talking about 1 in 10 cars, equivalent of material, that's a lot. And, it's a chance to have a pretty big impact on the near term, price structure of these things. Well, the other, piece that we're focusing on a lot is material manufacturing. And
what does it mean?
Well, recycling is one part of the equation. It's a source of raw materials. Ultimately, it's a really critical part of the market. But we're also, going all the way through to finished cathode material, anode copper foils, and really, becoming a manufacturing company for these core battery materials. And that supply chain just doesn't exist in North America right now. It's sort of amazing how critical this is to us and to the world, and how centralized it is right now in Asia.
Where is it centralized? I know Korea had a big manufacturing. Obviously, China does as well. Where are the materials coming from? Because I hear everything from Australia, the Congo, all these different places people claim the materials are coming from. But in reality, where is the material for battery packs coming from today, and where are they being manufactured?
It's complicated as hell. Looking at the supply chain map for this stuff is like throwing spaghetti on the wall, literally. The problem is you have 4 or 5 critical materials, all of which come from really different continents and sometimes a mix of them. So you kind of have to pick which critical material you want to follow and then look at it. Lithium, for instance, is coming from Australia, South America. Often it from South America, it might come to North America, then it might go to China, and then it might go to Korea or Japan, then it may come back to North America. That's just lithium. Copper can be even more silly. North America, is a big scrap market for copper, wire, plumbing, all these things. We're a big generator of copper waste. Yet we don't have much copper manufacturing. So we actually export copper scrap back to China and Korea, where it gets made into, in some cases, the same anode copper foil, then sent right back to North America to be made into batteries. So really kind of crazy flow.
This should all be done on the continent, whether it's, Mexico, South America, the United States. And so insourcing this would be more efficient, certainly in terms of moving atoms around the planet, but would it be feasible on a cost basis to do this in, like, say, Mexico or even in the United States to manufacture batteries here and to do more of this here? Is that the goal?
It absolutely is the goal, and it is feasible. These things are not massive, labor-intensive practices. They have some technical jobs and some good jobs associated with them, but it's more about automation and chemical engineering and process control. The reason that they are done predominantly in Asia is, it's a little bit legacy. This is where the companies that initially had expertise in this were, and they scaled up. That kind of makes sense. But absolutely, this can be cost efficient, done near where batteries are assembled. And really, should be and certainly will be in the future.
Yeah, it does seem to me we're starting to realize that the supply chain optimization we did for the past 20 years might have been flawed in that we were arbitraging labor, but at the expense of the resiliency of the supply chain, which we experienced during the pandemic. And now we're seeing, another issue, which is we're making EV batteries, but we're sending them on cargo ships that are massive pollutants. And that's a lot of weight to be sending back and forth around the world, I assume.
Absolutely. The resiliency of that, the lead time of it is really challenging. And the embedded emissions of all the movement and transportation is a major factor. EVs are obviously, they're great for carbon, and over the use of the EV, they pay back themselves many times over. But when you kind of do that analysis, making the electric car, does have a pretty significant investment in emissions is kind of how I think about it. We invest energy, it invests some emissions from all the things that went into it. And then it has a payback period as you use it and don't burn gasoline. And by doing things like, localizing the supply chain, increasing recycled material content, we can change the payback period, the emissions payback period of an electric car dramatically. Right? We can make it, I think, twice as good, which is a really big deal. That might mean the difference between 10 or 20,000 miles of driving before you hit your CO2 payback versus maybe a few thousand.
That was another part of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that was being spread. People saying, "Oh, Absolutely. These cars are, they're more damaging to create an EV than it's worth." This is poppycock, yeah.
Yeah, that was never true. I mean, even in the worst grid, driving the thing, on coal power, which it's not the best model, obviously, but even in that case, you were still very efficient and quite clean. So, it's all upside from there. And, I think people were trying to kind of, find different, flaws and complex arguments to make it seem that EVs weren't very good. But in any case, doing these other, issues like localizing and recycling, it makes it, an absolute no-brainer.
Is there going to be a battery shortage? We keep hearing that there's going to be a battery shortage because EVs, power walls, grid systems are, growing at a pace that maybe people, even in the biggest estimates didn't anticipate. People are buying more laptops, buying more phones, buying more, upgrading their phones frequently. Is there going to be a shortage, you think? Is that a potential risk here that more people will want cars than we can actually make battery packs for?
Well, I think, we already see a shortage, basically. I think, truth be told, this whole thing could be ramping up even faster if there was, a full balance across the whole supply chain. What I sort of see from my point of view right now is, so many different OEMs, countries, factories, customers are leaping into EVs, making these huge announcements, saying they'll be fully electric in their fleet, this decade or next. They haven't, I think, really done the math fully on, what that entails in the supply chain and tracing it all the way back, literally all the way back to the mines. You need to do that, or else, it's not you haven't really fully solved it. And, it has the feeling to me of kind of a giant overbooked flight. All these people are like, oh, this is great. Like, we're going to go to that new place. We all want to go there. It looks great. Sweet. Yeah. Let's all get on the plane and go. And, everybody's saying they want to go there at the same time.
Right.
Meanwhile, we have to sort of build the planes to get there. We have to, figure out how to, sequence everyone. And,
you don't even have enough runway.
No, it's, and
no runway.
The figurative runway is like the time to do all this. And,
right.
It can all get sorted out over time, but, obviously we're trying to do this fast as a society and as a species. I do think, we're going to have a really painful time of it. And, it won't be just a simple battery shortage. I think it's going to kind of ripple through different parts of the supply chain. It may at one point be nickel shortages. Maybe it'll be cathode shortage. Maybe another day it'll be separator shortage.
Yeah. We're already seeing this, manifest itself, obviously during the PPE and issues around the pandemic. But then I just recently saw that the self-driving or assist driving in the Cadillac Escalade, which is supposed to be quite respectable level 2 kind of system, that they took it out in the 22 model of the Escalade. I don't know if you saw this, because they can't get the chips.
Yeah.
So the chip shortage is just indicative of what can happen when you have a rush or, any kind of disruption in these services. But we have plenty of material. It's just the cost of digging it up, right? We have material here in the United States in some places of rare earth minerals. There's not a rare earth mineral shortage. It's just the ability to dig it up and build the infrastructure, correct?
For the most part, yeah. I think, nickel may be a little challenging as we go through all this. There is enough of it, but it's been searched for more thoroughly than some of the other critical materials. I think there's tons of lithium in the Earth's crust. It's quite prevalent. That's one where it's the whole industry to go from searching for it to developing it, refining it, just needs to scale, and it takes too long. I mean, some of these mines take 8 years, to go from exploration to production. It's a very, very slow process. Maybe we can cut that in half or do some dramatic things. But even as you do that, you kind of start to cut environmental corners and you're pushing into more sensitive areas. So there's no free lunch there. It's one reason that I'm so excited about, going after every little bit of recycled material we possibly can, because it is the lowest hanging fruit. It's the lowest cost, the lowest emissions, and has the least disruption to everything else going on. So
yeah,
every atom of that should be recycled that we possibly can.
If only we thought about water usage in the United States this way. We literally don't have water meters and we have massive leaks, and we just simply do not focus on the leakage, literal leakage. And here, you're talking about the stamping of, circles into different metal sheets, and it's just going on the cutting room floor. It makes no sense.
Yeah, and it's amazing even on the consumer battery side how much, leakage is a good word for it. Leakage there is in the supply chain. It's something like 90% of the batteries that get sold to consumers, put in small devices, end up not recycled in North America.
In a landfill somewhere.
Landfilled, maybe stockpiled in somebody's garage or drawer or somewhere. It's pretty amazing. And, those contain an incredible amount of valuable materials, cobalt especially. And that is sort of what we're aiming to, build into a virtual mine.
What would be the value in an average iPhone of the materials in the battery and whatever for recycling? Is it $10 worth of materials, 20, 5? If you were able to efficiently get it out?
Yeah, it's small compared to the value of the iPhone, of course. The battery to device, cost ratio is way different than an EV. It's on the order of single digit dollars. It's not, not like you're going to get a huge payday there, but, I think the bigger issue is the impact it can have on sourcing of those materials for an EV. Sort of amazing, but only a few hundred iPhones, can provide enough cobalt to make a new Tesla battery pack.
Really?
Wow. It's a difference in the chemistry used in consumer electronics devices that are very cobalt intensive relative to, EV or Powerwall type batteries that are really very efficient with cobalt. So that's one of the really compelling reasons to do that.
We need to have a bit of a coordinated effort like we had around straws and plastic bags, where we banned straws in India, in the UK, in New York and California. And then the same thing with plastic bags, where we said, hey, listen, you got to pay for it. There should be a very aggressive public campaign of, if you have batteries sitting in drawers, please go to this location. You can go to, let's say every post office just said, you go to a post office, you give them a battery, they give you a $5 gift card. Just that simple. Some really simple way for the government to intervene and say, here's a use for post office. Any, for recycling, any, electronics you have, bring it to your post office and we'll try to, sell that to recycling companies. Because Apple now is doing that. Apple will take back anything you give them, even old iMacs. They won't give you a credit for the oldest ones, but at least they'll take them. And I'm assuming they're doing some sort of, I hope they're doing some sort of conscientious recycling. They claim they are, but I don't know if they are or not.
No, they put a lot of thought into it. They're doing some pretty creative things in this whole space, but I think you're exactly right. I mean, kind of a call to arms, across the country to have people help with this. It almost feels like kind of the World War II stuff where, we're trying to rally critical materials that we already have and control. It's an exciting thing that I think people could really get fired up about.
Well, you just think about it as a generational thing. The boomers, I think, were a little too busy just, being successful. Then you have us as Gen Xers who are really thinking about these things and trying to change the world. But now you have the millennials and Gen Z, where I think that this is the first thing on their mind, right?
Yeah.
It was a consideration for us. Obviously, some people like yourself made this our life's mission, but we were very aware of it. But if you just look at the action set, if people bring straws, my 3 daughters are just like, we don't want straws. We don't want straws. Please don't give us straws. They'll ask the waiter preemptively to not bring a straw. And then, of course, the waiter brings straws, puts them in the drink, and they're just like, why did you bring the straws? It's like, it's soul crushing for them to get a straw. which is pretty awesome when you think about it.
It's incredible how much, the different generations really get this, and it immediately clicks and makes sense on how it should all work. This is also, I'd say, been on the mind of a lot of, EV customers, for a long time. I mean, people really want to think about, the emissions, the embedded emissions, what happens at end of life to the product. For me, it was always kind of, interesting to see that discrepancy because, we'd be spending all of our time on making more of them and making it better and cheaper, faster. But then it sort of in the top 10 list of questions from customers was, well, what about, end of life? And what about, supply chain? And, not that we'd, not focus on it all, but it was harder to put as much balanced effort in that as consumers were putting in their mind.
Based on what you know about manufacturing, which has been, a large portion of your career's work, we constantly hear like, hey, listen, we can't make iPhones or laptops in America. But then we see Tesla and yourselves and, supply chain being built here to build cars and to build power walls, to build solar, whatever it happens to be. Do you think because we obviously have some geopolitical issues right now around, various authoritarian countries and, our interactions with them, this seems to me to be a national security issue that we would be able to have batteries produced here in America. Is this something we should be looking at as, a critically important thing for, the sovereignness of America?
I absolutely think it is. I mean, it to me seems totally untenable that we would electrify our whole transportation fleet and have all of that dependent on a whole nother set of countries for every core component of it. I can't see that possibly working. And if we did that, it would be this, massive transfer of, our whole economy, a big part of our economy somewhere else.
Could iPhones be made here? Like just straight up, like you guys build cars here. People were like, that's impossible. You did it. Like, could iPhones and just let's just say smartphones be manufactured here? And what would they cost? Like an extra $100 or something? Like,
I mean, I think, we can absolutely build complicated things, in the United States. I think part of it is, we didn't try. And, we made some strategic decisions that it wasn't, it wasn't a heads up competition in some cases. Certainly there's talent here. There's smart people. There's, I'd say, really a lot of innovation and creativity, especially around, automation and factory software and the way to improve this, very, in quick cycles. I'm not saying it's an easy competition. I mean, China's, incredibly entrepreneurial and they're working, really, really hard. I think, people can't take that for granted, and can't understand maybe without really being there and going there, how intense and how much work they put into this and succeeding. But we can compete. We absolutely can. I mean, I'm not willing to just like throw up my hands and give up and say like, oh, well, we're too successful or lazy or something. I'd move to a different country if that was the case.
As we wrap here, people have been talking a whole bunch about solid state batteries. I guess QuantumScape is one of the companies working on that. What are your thoughts in, this ultra fast charging concept, I guess, versus lithium? Tell us a little bit about how the future of batteries is going to play out over the next 2 decades.
Well, fundamentally, these are still lithium ion batteries. The chemistry going on inside the battery is very, very similar. The big difference is in the anode material and the separator. Okay. So in the anode, instead of having something like graphite or silicon, where you have to basically kind of store the lithium inside of a matrix of carbon or silicon oxide or silicon, you instead can store the lithium as metallic lithium, just literally a sheet or a film of lithium. To do that, usually requires some really interesting changes to the separator and the electrolyte. Whether it's a ceramic or whether it has different characteristics that allow that lithium to be a metal. So that's really the main structural change that's happening. Is
it going to work?
Oh,
and if so, when?
I think it will work. I mean, the performance from QuantumScape in particular that I've seen is really, really good. the science of it is robust. The performance is amazing. Manufacturing of it is really difficult. So, this is, something where, that whole set of technologies has to get scaled. It has to get, made robust and made at the right price point. I'm confident. I'd rather bet on that than I would betting on a chemistry invention, to make, a new chemistry situation work for a battery. So I do think this is, an important part of the future of batteries, but
it has better density, I guess, is part of the concept here. So if it had better density, does that mean it's a lighter vehicle, or you need less of them, therefore the cost would go down? But currently it's very expensive to manufacture. Is that what we're kind of in right now in terms of the zone?
Yep, that's pretty much exactly it. It's higher energy density, higher in terms of mass and volume, both. Much faster charge times. So that's another really potentially big benefit, of course. The lithium doesn't have to find its way into that matrix of graphite, so that's kind of a traffic jam for it, and you just avoid that. And it has lower materials costs.
15 minutes, you charge 80% of the pack or something like that, right? And it doesn't degrade it as much or something,
or even faster.
Even faster. Oh wow!
Yeah. So, what's possible and demonstrated at small scale is incredible. You're basically back to the couple minutes kind of charge times.
When would we see this in an electric vehicle, you think? Best case? Likely case?
Tricky to expect. I
5 to 10 years?
I don't want to get in front of, some of these different companies on their projections, but, I think it's a few years away. It's not like this is not going to be the 2023 model or something like that. Or, it has to mature and it has to, really get, scaled to gigawatt hours per year. We just got, in the beginning of this, we talked about how brutally hard that is. And I think, there's a whole cycle that has to happen with some of these new technologies. But it's so compelling. This kind of paints a roadmap to me, out several decades where, it's already sort of a no-brainer that everything will be electric. And then when you overlay, technology getting, even much better and cheaper, it's absolutely assured.
Yeah, that is one of the great things, I think, of people building on the shoulders of your legacy and Elon's and the whole team over there, is now it's inspired people to really think bigger, right? And I really think that what you did and what Elon has done, even more than the legacy of electric vehicles, is an entire generation, and I see it as an angel investor all the time because they reference y'all, is that you inspired people to just try to do something even more ambitious. And so for that, humanity owes you a great thank you. And so on behalf of humanity, I want to thank you, JB, for all the hard work you and the teams over there did, because the ramifications are everywhere. I'm seeing people who want to take on desalinization. I'm seeing people who want to take on fusion. Just, huge, audacious projects, I think. And if it wasn't for Tesla, I don't think people would be as bold and ambitious to save humanity from, let's face it, we got an existential crisis here, right? And how are you feeling optimistically about our chances against global warming? Do you wake up in the morning sometime and say, this feels 50-50? Or do you wake up and say, you know what, knowing what I know about the human spirit and innovation and entrepreneurship, we're going to beat this thing?
Well, I'm an optimist and a technologist. I know we're going to beat this thing, but at the same time, I think it's going to be a bumpy ride and probably more bumpy than everybody expects and realizes. We have so much change baked in to where we are even today. And really, we have a lot of work to do, to get to truly zero emissions. It always shocks me because so many of the projections and everything else are talking about, a percent reduction, on, let's reduce back to 2000 levels. We need to get to zero. This isn't about sort of a 10 or 20% reduction or 50% reduction. It's when do we get to zero? That seems super obvious if you think about it. It's when you stop digging. We're over
our skis. We need to stop.
We're literally in a hole, digging a hole. And it's well, we're going to slow down the dig. And you're really? Let's actually not dig at all.
Yeah, we need to fill in the hole. We need to get back to the surface level here. We're underwater. I mean, this is dangerous territory that, as I think a lot of people have pointed out, this is a really stupid experiment to do with our planet.
It's unbelievably stupid. And I think, sometimes it's almost the case, again, it's almost hard to trust everyone with the data because you don't want to demoralize the whole planet either. So we kind of set out little intermediate targets that seem, motivational and whatnot. But anyway, I am optimistic. We're going to solve it. This won't be the end of humanity or something like that. I think, the next years and decades are going to be pretty intense, though, in terms of people really realizing how bad this experiment was and rallying, more and more of our collective willpower to go fix it faster.
And we will realize what we lost when it's gone. Just a couple of years ago, I went scuba diving on the Great Barrier Reef, and the water is 1.5 degrees warmer or something, and you see these amazing coral formations, and then you see dead coral floating. You come around one turn, and it's heartbreaking, and it's like that's not coming back. You're not going to get the ocean to reverse 1.5 degrees in time for this coral to not be destroyed. Yep. And the number of homes that will burn, the number of forests that will burn, the number of species who will be displaced. We can't even calculate it. We have the technology. I think the frustrating part, for a lot of us is it's so obvious that the technology and the solution is there. It's about execution at scale. And, I think that's one of the great things that you've done in your career is to execute at scale, right?
Yeah. And it's hard, but, people are excited, to do it. And if we can make the products better, it doesn't have to be, chasing everyone with a stick, that's just not going to work and it's not going to be fast enough. So, that was kind of always the mantra at Tesla was, okay, to really do this faster, we have to make a better car. It has to be better in every way.
Yes.
It can't be regulated into existence.
It's kind of like, telling people you can't have a steak ever, or you're going to have to eat a bunch of grass and that's going to save the planet. It's not going to work. We need to work with human motivation here. Listen, JB, thanks for the hard work. I know you guys have done a great job with the fundraising, which I assume means you're hiring talented people. If people wanted to come work with you and save the planet and do the good work that you're doing over there, how can they find out about job opportunities and careers to save the planet?
Yeah, thank you for the reminder. If people want to learn more, they can come to our website, redwoodmaterials.com. We've got a bunch of different awesome job openings. We're hiring, engineers across the whole space, a lot of chemical engineers, automation, software, controls, mechanical engineering. It's a really fun problem. And I think, a pretty amazing team to get in early and make some major changes to this whole industry.
This is the ground floor, folks. So if you've got that engineering degree, this is a great option for you. So please go apply, and the world needs you. All right, JB, continued success, and we'll see you all next time on This Week in Startups. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation. Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories. The first story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of Reed College after the first 6 months, but then stayed around as a drop-in for another 18 months or so before I really quit. So why'd I drop out? It started before I was born. My biological mother was a young, unwed graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates, so everything was all set for me to be adopted at birth by a lawyer and his wife. Except that when I popped out, they decided at the last minute that they really wanted a girl. So my parents, who were on a waiting list, got a call in the middle of the night asking, "We've got an unexpected baby boy. Do you want him?" They said, "Of course." My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers. She only relented a few months later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life. And 17 years later, I did go to college. But I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford. And all of my working class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition. After 6 months, I couldn't see the value in it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was, spending all of the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them.